Johnny Carson's secret concerns something we hope he is going to do. Let's share your secret with the audience. Johnny, will you whisper to me what it's about?
Will do.
For 3 decades, Johnny Carson did more than host The Tonight Show. He quietly decided who America trusted before sleep. On camera, he was relaxed, generous, and effortlessly funny. Off camera, the rules were sharper. Guests vanished. Careers stalled or soared. Power moved silently. This is not gossip or myth. These are 15 verified secrets that reveal how Johnny Carson became the most powerful gatekeeper in television history. Who really controlled late night? Who paid the price? And who was quietly locked out forever? And why? 1. The Tonight Show had a real ban list. The answer is, the ban list wasn't official on paper, but it absolutely existed. And that is where the nice guy image starts to crack a little. Because The Tonight Show didn't just invite people, it quietly filtered them out. Recent reporting tied to Mark Malkoff's book, Love, Johnny Carson, paints the same picture from multiple angles. Insiders say there was a real, working, do-not-book reality behind the curtain. Even if it was never pinned to a bulletin board like some cartoon villain checklist. Longtime producer Peter Lassalle confirmed to Malkoff that the ban list was real, and the way it operated was almost the smartest part, because it rarely created a public fight. Instead, it happened in soft silence. A publicist would call. A guest would suddenly be unavailable. The schedule would fill up, and if you were on the wrong side of Johnny's memory, you didn't get a dramatic breakup. You got a slow fade. In some cases, people who were iced out during Carson's weeks still showed up when guest hosts took over, which tells you the decision wasn't always NBC's. It was Johnny's. Here's what makes it chilling. Sources describe more than 30 names floating around in these stories. And whether that list lived on paper or in people's heads, it functioned the same. One host had the power to shut a door that millions of viewers treated like the front porch of America. So, ask yourself this. If you bomb once, do you deserve a lifetime exile? If you annoyed the host, is that a booking choice or a career sentence? And should one host have that much power? Because the next secret is where it gets personal. And some bans hurt more than others. So who took the deepest hit, and why? 2. Jay Leno was once on Carson's bad side. And for proof that the ban machine could hit anyone, even the guy who would one day inherit the chair, look at Jay Leno. According to reporting around Mark Malkoff's Love, Johnny Carson, Leno wasn't just a name in the comedy pipeline. He was a frequent guest, a rising favorite, a guy who should have been safe. But after multiple appearances, Carson reportedly went cold on him. Not with a fight, not with a headline, with something scarier in show business. Silence. One account quotes longtime producer Peter Lassalle, describing Carson's view that Leno's material wasn't landing the same, and that once Johnny decided he didn't like someone's jokes, that switch rarely flipped back. So imagine being a comedian in that era. The couch wasn't just a couch, it was a career elevator. If Johnny stopped calling you, the industry noticed. Clubs noticed. Agents noticed. Audiences felt it without knowing why. And if you were Jay Leno, you had to keep grinding, while the biggest stage in America quietly stopped returning your calls. Here's the uncomfortable part. Was it about one bad set, or did Carson smell future competition before anyone said it out loud? Did Leno make a move that felt disloyal, or was Johnny simply protecting his kingdom the way kings do? And if one man can freeze out a comic with a single decision, what does that say about the power of late night? Because comedians weren't the only ones who paid a price. So who else got punished for breaking Johnny's unwritten rules? 3. One bad segment could end your career. And once you realize the ban list could touch anyone, you start to understand the deeper rule of Carson's kingdom. On The Tonight Show, a single awkward moment could follow you like a shadow. People forget how high the stakes were. This was not a small podcast clip that disappears into the scroll. This was the biggest late-night stage in America, and the vibe had to stay smooth. If a guest got boring, rambled, or crashed the rhythm, Carson could cut it short and move on, sometimes with a commercial break as the escape hatch, while producers rushed in like a pit crew to reset the damage. And it didn't matter if you were famous. Orson Welles, a giant in film history, still felt how unusual Carson's world was. Welles even noted how staff reacted when Carson did something as basic as popping into a dressing room to say hello, because Johnny wasn't built for cozy backstage bonding. It was business, timing, and control. Now, add one more ingredient: embarrassment. Dean Martin's whole persona played near the edge, and the edge is fun, until it isn't. On Carson's stage, a surprise that makes the host look foolish or out of control is not a cute story later. It can be a quiet goodbye. So, here's the question. If you bomb once, should you really become one of those Johnny Carson guests never invited back? If the host protects the show, is that leadership or fear? If you are a public figure, do you deserve forgiveness for one messy night? And if Carson decides you are unsafe, who can overturn that? Because Carson hated surprises. Which leads to the next secret. What backstage system was built to make sure nothing unexpected ever reached Johnny's desk? 4. Spontaneous TV was carefully engineered. Carson hated surprises, so the show built a whole system to make spontaneous feel safe. People at home saw the loose laughs, the casual chair swivel, and the feeling that anything could happen. But behind the scenes, it was carefully engineered. One former Tonight Show assistant, Barbara Meltzer, said Carson wanted guests to feel comfortable and that he usually knew what they were going to talk about ahead of time. That did not happen by magic. It happened because talent coordinators booked the guests, spoke with them, and mapped out the conversation so Johnny could look relaxed without walking into chaos. And that changes how you see the whole show, right? The natural moment was often a controlled moment, not scripted word for word, but guided. Bullet points instead of a full script. Loose enough to feel alive, tight enough to protect the host. So, when you watch an old clip and think, wow, Johnny is so quick, ask yourself, how much of that quickness came from preparation that nobody on camera ever talked about? If the guest knew the lanes and Johnny knew the turns, is it still spontaneous? Or is it just brilliant engineering? And if your career depended on one couch invitation, would you risk going off-road? Because sometimes, control crossed into obsession. And once you see that, what else starts to look less like charm and more like protection? 5. Johnny Carson used 4 identical coffee cups. And once you start seeing how carefully the show was engineered, you notice something even smaller that still screams control. It is sitting right there on the desk, as it belongs to the furniture. The coffee cup. In interviews connected to PBS American Masters, people close to the show described a surprisingly specific Johnny Carson routine. He kept 4 identical coffee cups ready, so the desk always looked the same from show to show. Not similar, not close enough. Identical. Same shape, same look, same quiet signal to his brain that the world was in order. That sounds tiny, but think about what it really means. Carson lived inside a live broadcast machine where one weird guest, one missed cue or one awkward silence could turn into a headline the next morning. So he built little islands of certainty. The cup was one of them, a small ritual that told him, "This is my space, this is my rhythm." And honestly, haven't you done some version of that? You sit in the same chair, you use the same pen, you play the same song before a big moment. Now imagine your big moment happens 5 nights a week on national television for decades. Would you want your desk to change even slightly? Would you trust a random mug on a night where everything is already unpredictable? And if you needed 4 identical cups just to feel steady, what does that say about the pressure behind that calm smile? Because it wasn't only the cup. Props mattered too. So what other objects were quietly chosen to shape the mood and protect Carson's control? 6. The desk was a weapon, not furniture. You can almost see it now. The 4 identical cups lined up like little stage markers, because on The Tonight Show, props were never just props. And the biggest prop of all was the one nobody questioned, because it looked so normal. Johnny's desk. On camera, it read, as furniture. Off camera, it functioned like a border wall with a laugh track. That desk kept Johnny centered, higher, and visually in charge, even when a guest was the bigger celebrity that week. The audience didn't need to be told who owned the room. Their eyes got the message instantly. And when Johnny did break that rule, it meant something. People who studied the show talk about how rare it was for Carson to leave the desk and bring a comedian over to the couch, like an unspoken promotion that only happened when Johnny was genuinely impressed. It also gave him control over timing. He could tap it, lean back, shuffle cards, or let a beat hang without looking lost. Even the desk items became part of the power. Language. There's a famous story of Don Rickles damaging a cigarette box on Carson's desk, and Johnny turning it into a moment the very next night. Like the desk itself had been disrespected, not just a prop. So, let me ask you this. If the desk decides who feels safe and who feels small, was it ever just a set? Do you think guests sensed that invisible line the second they sat down? And if you were booked on Carson, would you want the couch invite? Or would it feel like walking into the lion's den on purpose? Because the real power plays weren't always in the spotlight. They were waiting just off camera, weren't they? 7. Carson nearly walked away from NBC. Here's the part people forget when they talk about Johnny like he was simply the host. At a certain point, he wasn't just a talent. He was the franchise. And that meant NBC was not really hiring Johnny Carson anymore. They were renting him. Around 1979, the relationship hit a pressure point. Carson was tired, protective of his image, and very aware of how much late night belonged to him in the public mind. So, the unthinkable started to feel possible. He could actually walk. Imagine being an NBC executive and realizing the face of your night schedule might vanish. What happens to the audience? What happens to affiliates? What happens to all the money that follows him like a shadow? That is why the negotiation turned into a contract battle with real fear behind it. Carson's leverage was simple. You can't replace a habit. People did not watch a show. They watched Johnny. And when the dust settled, he ended up in a position that looked almost unreal, earning $25 million a year while working 1 hour a night, 3 nights a week for 37 weeks a year. That's not just a deal. That's a coronation. So, let me ask you, if you were NBC, would you pay anything to keep that throne occupied? And if you were Carson, would you feel loyal or trapped? And when a network realizes one person can bend the schedule, Who really has the power in the building? Because here's the twist. He didn't just win contracts. He changed the rules of late-night leadership. And the next secret is where the real power plays start. So what do you think he controlled when the cameras weren't rolling? 8. Carson quietly built his own empire. Right when you think Johnny Carson's power ended at the edge of the desk, you realize the desk was just the front gate. Behind it, he was quietly building something bigger than a nightly monologue, a business that could outlive the applause. By 1980, Carson wasn't only the host. He had his own production operation shaping what got made, how it got sold, and who got paid, including distribution deals tied to The Tonight Show itself. And this is where the story gets spicy in a very corporate way, because ownership is the ultimate punchline. When you control the machine, you don't have to beg the machine. You negotiate with it. You can protect your image, decide what footage lives on, and keep your legacy from being chopped into random clips without permission. That long game became real because the company controlling the licensing rights to The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson and its archive, is literally part of the Carson Empire story. So ask yourself, how many just a TV host celebrities were thinking like studio bosses at the same time? If Carson could choose what the public sees and when they see it, is that still entertainment, or is it strategy? And if your favorite late-night moment exists because someone allowed it to exist, what else got locked away? That's why this isn't just Johnny Carson Production Company power trivia. It's a blueprint. And once you have that kind of control, you start fearing the one thing you can't control. So, what happened when that fear showed up at the studio door? 9. The mob problem nobody talks about. With power came danger, and not the Hollywood kind that stays politely inside the studio gates. Because once you become the face of late night, you also become a walking paycheck with a schedule. And in Henry Bushkin's memoir about Carson, he describes a shadowy chapter that barely gets mentioned in the usual Tonight Show nostalgia, the fear that organized crime attention had drifted too close for comfort. Think about how weird that is. America watched Johnny crack jokes at his desk every night. But behind the scenes, the worry was not, will the monologue work? It was, who's listening and what do they want? In Bushkin's telling, it is not presented like a movie scene with dramatic music. It feels more like a slow leak in the walls, a sense that if you are famous enough, somebody will eventually try to invoice you for your own safety. And that's the real Tonight Show behind-the-scenes secret here. The mob angle, if you believe Bushkin's account, is less about glamour and more about pressure, quiet pressure. The kind that makes a powerful person start changing routines, looking over shoulders, and realizing the spotlight is not always friendly. So let me ask you this. If you were Johnny, would you even tell your staff, or would you keep it locked up to protect the show? Would you still walk out smiling when your gut is doing the opposite? And how many random choices by celebrities are really fear management dressed up as privacy? Because if fear could follow him home, what else was following him into the studio every single night? 10. The night Carson broke into an apartment. And here's where the Johnny Carson Tonight Show legend stops feeling like television history and starts feeling like a lock clicking open in the dark. According to a memoir by his longtime lawyer and close confidant Henry Bushkin, one of Bushkin's earliest jobs for Carson involved helping him break into a posh Manhattan apartment in 1970 to gather evidence of his wife's infidelity. Not a joke, not a sketch premise, a real, messy, private life panic that spilled into real decisions. Think about what that says about the man who looked unshakable on camera. If you can host America's bedtime routine with a grin, but still feel desperate enough to do that off camera, what does control even mean for someone at that level? And here's the part most people miss. This wasn't just tabloid drama. It was a personality blueprint. Carson's whole brand was cool precision, the calm voice, the perfect pause, and the timing that made a room obey him. But moments like this suggest that when the lights went off, control could crack. Would you ever look at the desk the same way after hearing that? Would you trust the smile the same way? And if you were NBC watching your biggest star unravel in private, how carefully would you tiptoe around him in public? Because once a person learns they can't control their own home life, they often try to control everything else. The show, the staff, the guests, the narrative. So when you hear that Johnny's personal life shaped the show more than viewers realized, ask yourself this: what other Tonight Show rules were actually built as emotional armor? 11. Carson avoided real emotional intimacy on air. On camera, Johnny Carson could feel like your smartest uncle at the table, the one who could warm up an entire room with a single raised eyebrow. But one of the strangest Johnny Carson personality behind-the-scenes truths is that the warmth was often engineered, not shared. People who studied his era have pointed out how carefully he kept the emotional door half closed. He could be charming, even gentle, yet still leave you feeling like you never fully met him. And that was the point. Carson treated intimacy like a live wire, too much feeling, and the whole Tonight Show rhythm could short out. So he used the safer tools: jokes, timing, a quick pivot, a playful tease, and then right back to control. The audience got comfort. The guest got the spotlight. But Carson kept the private parts private, like he was hosting with one hand on the steering wheel at all times. Have you ever noticed how he could make a guest laugh hard, but almost never let the moment turn into a real confession? Did that distance make him cooler, or did it make him lonely? And when the cameras shut off, what do you think it did to the people who thought they were his friends? Because once you build a wall like that on national TV, it doesn't just protect you from strangers, it changes how you deal with rivals too. So, who did Carson keep at arm's length the most? 12. Bob Hope and others quietly clashed with him. And once you realize his private life kept leaking into the work, the next layer makes even more sense. Johnny didn't just guard the desk, he guarded his territory, and that included other legends. Because behind the clean suit and the easy grin, Johnny Carson's Hollywood feuds were sometimes less about hatred and more about friction. Different eras, different egos, different ideas of what funny should look like at 11:30. PBS's American Masters paints him as a man who could be warm in a room, then go ice cold the second the camera light clicked off. That's where names like Bob Hope come in. Hope was a giant, a brand, a whole industry by himself. And when giants share a spotlight, even a polite joke can feel like a shove. The tension wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was scripted smiles with unscripted stiffness underneath. Have you ever watched two comedians play nice and still felt the temperature drop? Have you noticed how a single pause can say more than a punchline? And if Carson was the gatekeeper of late night, what happens when another gatekeeper walks onto his set, expecting to run the room? That's the part most people miss. On The Tonight Show, the real battle was often over control of the moment, not the laugh. And here's the twist. Because despite the clashes, Carson could still turn one appearance into a career. So who did he quietly launch? And why? 13. The couch was a career launchpad. And this is where the real power move shows up, hiding in plain sight like it's just another piece of studio furniture. That couch. Because on The Tonight Show, a stand-up set could be good, even great, and still disappear into the night. But if Carson waved you over, if he called you to the couch, your career suddenly got stamped with approval like a passport at the world's strictest border. In Carson's peak era, you were talking about a show that could pull in around 17 million viewers on a regular night, which is almost impossible to picture now. So imagine the psychology of it. You walk out, your hands are a little sweaty, you hit your punchlines, you hear the laugh, and then you look over at the desk. Is he smiling? Is he leaning back? Is he already reaching for the next cue? Because that tiny gesture, sit down, could mean you were no longer just a comedian. You were a name. Have you ever watched those clips and noticed how the room changes when Carson decides someone is worth keeping close? Who do you think he was really picking? The funniest person or the safest bet for his brand? And if one man can lift you up that fast, what happens when he decides you're not useful anymore? Because the strangest part is, after crowning people like that for decades, Carson didn't stick around to watch what he built. So why did he disappear when he had it all? 14. Carson refused to watch his replacements. And here's the part that still messes with people who grew up thinking Johnny Carson would be around forever. When he finally stepped down, he didn't do the usual legend move of handing the crown to someone and blessing the future. He didn't stand at the edge of the stage like a proud coach. He didn't even act like a guy who wanted credit for building the whole late-night blueprint. He walked away and left a vacuum behind him. According to the way writers have described it, Carson refused to publicly pick a successor, and that single choice helped trigger the late-night landscape we recognize now, the competing shows and the constant "who owns the night" tension. Then, instead of popping up every week to give notes, take victory laps, or casually dunk on whoever took his chair, he did something colder and honestly rarer. He went quiet. You get a few cameos here and there. You get the occasional joke sent to someone else. You get a couple of humor pieces. But there was no big return, no commentary, no "here's what they're doing wrong." It's like he refused to become a critic of the thing he invented. He sailed, he learned random things, and he guarded the distance like it was part of the brand. The message was subtle but loud. The show was over, and he wasn't going to sit in his living room watching someone else try to be him. And that raises a weird question. If you built the biggest stage in America, why would you refuse to look at what happened after you left it? Was it pride? Was it self-protection? Or was it a final power move? The kind where silence says, "I don't need to compete anymore." So let me ask you, if you were Carson, would you watch the next guy every night? Or would you protect the memory of your own peak? If your whole life was C-controlled, could you handle being a spectator? And if he could disappear that completely, what was the one thing he never wanted the public to understand about him? 15. The vanishing act was the final power move. And here's the part that still feels unreal. After 30 years on America's 1130 throne, Johnny Carson didn't transition. He did not tour. He did not host specials. He did not sit on a panel and grade the next generation. He simply left. And in a business where everybody is fighting to stay seen, disappearing can be the loudest move you make. Think about what that does to a legacy. If you stay around, people get used to you. If you comment on your replacements, you become a headline. If you chase attention, you shrink into a regular celebrity. Carson refused all of that. After he retired in 1992, he kept his distance so carefully that he gave only one real post-retirement interview and then went right back behind the curtain. So, what was he protecting, exactly? The myth, the mystery, or his own peace? The receipts are in the tiny details. A few cameos here and there, a joke sent to Letterman once in a while, some quiet humor writing, then back to private life, like he was sealing a vault and walking away with the key. And that's why people still argue about him. Because you can't fully solve someone who refuses to give you the last chapter. Would most stars today even be able to do that? If your whole identity is being watched, what happens when you stop? And if Carson really had it all, why did he choose silence as his final statement? So with that in mind, let's land this plane the right way. What do you think Carson wanted us to remember, and what did he want us to never see? When you zoom out, All 15 Johnny Carson Tonight Show secrets point to one repeating pattern: control. Control of the couch, control of the room, control of who got welcomed back, and who quietly found themselves on the outside looking in. Even the famous stories about a private no-go list and the way he guarded access to that stage fit the same blueprint. Late night wasn't just jokes, it was a gate. And it makes you wonder what modern late night really is now. Is the gatekeeper a host, a network, or an algorithm? Which secret shocked you the most? Should any host have this much power? Who today is the new gatekeeper? Did Carson protect comedy or control it?